The gladiator's last meal. What Roman warriors actually ate before the arena. Everyone pictures a gladiator as this massive meat-eating warrior, huge, powerful, living on roasted joints and red wine. The thing is, they were mostly vegetarian. They were called the Barley Men, and that diet, it might have been exactly what kept them alive in the arena. Now, before we get into the food, we need to talk about where these men actually lived, because the Hollywood version, the underground dungeon, the chains, the misery, that is only part of the story. Gladiators lived and trained in schools called ludi, and while school might sound generous, the Ludus Magnus in Rome, built right next to the Colosseum by Emperor Domitian in the late 1st century AD, was genuinely impressive. Heated floors in winter, baths, an infirmary, a small training arena that seated 3,000 spectators who would come just to watch them practice. It was part prison, part elite sports academy, and part theater all at once. The man who ran it all was called the lanista. Think of him as a coach, a manager, and a slave owner rolled into one. He had bought these men. Most were slaves, prisoners of war, or condemned criminals, though some actually volunteered, which we will come back to, and they were his investment. A dead gladiator was a financial loss, so the lanista kept them fed, kept them healthy, and kept them fighting. And what he fed them was this. For our gladiator porridge, the Romans called it the diet gladiatorianum saganum, literally the gladiator's fattening. What you will need is 1 cup of pearl barley, half a cup of dried fava beans, also called broad beans, 2 cups of water or light broth to cook, a drizzle of olive oil, a pinch of salt, and optionally a few dried figs or dates on the side. Go ahead and rinse your barley and your beans. If you are using dried fava beans that have not been pre-soaked, soak them overnight. If you are using canned, just drain and rinse. Then add the barley and the beans together into a pot. Cover with your water or broth and bring it to a boil. Reduce to a simmer, put the lid on, and let it go for about 30 to 40 minutes until the barley is soft and most of the liquid has been absorbed. Now, while that cooks, and it will need a good while, let us talk about why these men were eating barley and beans instead of beef and wine, because the answer is more interesting than you might think. The Romans actually had a name for gladiators that was not particularly flattering: Hordearii, barley eaters. It was meant as an insult from the outside world. Regular Romans, especially wealthier ones, ate wheat bread, not barley. Barley was cheap. Barley was peasant food. So calling a gladiator a barley eater was a little like calling someone today a gas station sushi guy. It was not meant kindly. But here is where it gets interesting. In 1993, archaeologists discovered a gladiator cemetery in Ephesus in what is now Western Turkey. Ephesus, at the time, was a city of 200,000 people and one of the most important cities in the Roman world. And this cemetery, the only confirmed gladiator graveyard ever found, held the bones of over 60 men. Researchers from the Medical University of Vienna ran isotopic analysis on those bones. This is a technique that reads the chemical signatures left behind by what a person ate during their lifetime. And what came back surprised everyone. The gladiators were eating almost no meat at all. Their diet was overwhelmingly plant-based: barley, beans, dried fruit. And compared to ordinary Roman citizens buried nearby, the gladiators had dramatically higher bone density, stronger bones, more resilient skeletons from eating less. Now, Galen, who was one of the most famous physicians in the ancient world and actually served as a doctor to gladiators for a time, was not impressed by any of this. He complained that the barley diet, rather than building hard, lean muscle, made the men soft and flabby. And he was right, actually. That was the point. A layer of subcutaneous fat, fat just beneath the skin, was not a bug in the gladiator's physique. It was a feature. Researcher Carl Grossschmidt explained it this way. A fat cushion protects you from cut wounds. It shields nerves and blood vessels. A lean gladiator with no fat layer gets the same slash across the chest and hits a nerve. A gladiator with that protective padding gets the same slash, bleeds dramatically, the crowd goes wild, and he fights on. Surface wounds looked spectacular. Deep wounds ended careers. The fat was armor. There is also the matter of the ash drink. Pliny the Elder, writing in the 1st century AD, mentions a strange tonic that gladiators consumed after hard training, a mixture of charred plant ash stirred into water or vinegar. It sounds horrible. It also sounds like it absolutely should not work. But the isotopic analysis from the Ephesus bones showed the gladiators had significantly elevated strontium levels compared to regular Romans, and strontium comes from calcium-rich mineral sources. The ash drink, it seems, was an ancient Gatorade, a bone recovery supplement that actually worked. 2,000 years before sports science existed, these men had figured out how to rebuild their skeletons faster than anyone else in the empire. Which brings us back to the food. So once your barley and beans have simmered down and gone soft, stir in a drizzle of olive oil and your salt. The texture should be thick, almost like a porridge or a very soft risotto. It should hold its shape on a plate but not be stiff. If it is too thick, just add a splash of water and stir it through. Then plate it up simply, and if you want to be authentic, put a few dried figs alongside. The sweetness of the figs against the earthiness of the barley is genuinely a good combination. Now, about those volunteers I mentioned earlier. You might wonder who in their right mind would choose this life. The answer is mostly desperation and occasionally ego. A volunteer gladiator, called an Hordearii, gave up his legal rights and his social standing the moment he signed with a lanista. He was, in the eyes of Roman law, reduced to the same status as a slave or a criminal, and yet men did it. Some were in debt and saw no other way out. Some were genuinely drawn to the fame because successful gladiators were celebrities. Their faces appeared on mosaics, on pottery, on graffiti scratched into the walls of Pompeii. There are love letters to gladiators that survived, fan mail. In the 1st century AD, a gladiator named Spiculus was so beloved by Emperor Nero that Nero gifted him an entire palace. From barley eater to palace owner, not the worst career arc. And here we are, a Roman gladiator's meal, barley and fava bean porridge, olive oil, dried figs. This is what the Barley Men ate. All right, let us see what kept an empire's warriors alive. That is actually really good. It is earthy and filling, and the olive oil rounds out everything. I was expecting something that tasted like punishment, and instead it just tastes like a really solid lunch. The figs alongside make it feel almost luxurious by comparison, which I suspect was the point, a little sweetness at the end of a hard day. It will not win any prizes for excitement, but if you had just spent 4 hours training with a wooden sword in the Roman sun, this would feel like exactly what you needed. And if you enjoyed this trip back to ancient Rome, make sure you subscribe, because next time we are going somewhere equally unexpected. I'll see you then on Dish Diaries.